Hello, class 8 students. How are you all? So, today, Prerna ma'am is going to teach you chapter number 7 from your textbook. So, first of all, I want all of you to open your textbooks to chapter number 7, which is on page number 60. All right. So, all of us are on, we are on page number 60, chapter number 7, and the name of the chapter is The Great Uprising of 1857. Now, in the previous class, if you remember, we studied about how, basically what the British were doing to India. They were trying to have control over India in different spheres, in political, in administration, in economic, and even in education. So while all of this was happening, there were some people who kind of try to bring about a change in the Indian society, wherein we talked about the Indian Renaissance. We talked about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Swami Vivekananda, Annie Besant, so many reformers. And if you remember in the previous class, I talked about, or I left you with a question that while the British was bringing about so many changes in India, were the people happy, or how did the people actually feel about these changes? So how did people react to certain changes, or how did people react when the British tried to control the entire India exactly as per their will? That's what we are going to study in this chapter, when the first war of independence, that is the uprising of 1857, or what we call as the Revolt of 1857, occurred. Okay, so in this chapter, in chapter number 7, we are going to have some key points or key topics that we are going to talk about. So this uprising of 1857, we are going to understand what were the political, economic, social, religious, and military causes. So this uprising or this revolt of 1857, it did not occur only because of one reason or one factor. There were several factors. There were political reasons, there were economic reasons, there were social religious reasons and military causes as well as social causes. Then there was an immediate cause to this revolt of 1857 or the uprising of 1857. Then we'll talk about what were the consequences of the revolt, and lastly we are going to study about the nature of the revolt. So let us start reading this story about the first war of independence, known as the Revolt of 1857. Okay. So like I told you just now, there were several causes, there were several factors which were responsible for this revolt. So the first set of causes, or the first set of factors that we are going to talk about, is political causes. Now, in the previous classes, we have studied how British try to politically control India. So the first political cause was the doctrine of lapse, which was introduced by Lord Dalhousie, and it applied this policy to annex Indian states. According to this policy, if a ruler of a dependent Indian state died without a legal heir, the state would come directly under the East India Company or the British. So basically, in simple words, the rule was, or the doctrine of lapse stated that, let's say there's a ruler who doesn't have any son, or maybe a daughter, or whatever, basically someone who's connected to him by blood, his own children, then that particular kingdom will straight away be brought under the control of the East India Company, whether the people wanted it to happen or not. That it really didn't matter to the British. There was no legal heir. The empire or the kingdom was brought under the British control. Second, discourtesy to the Mughal emperor. So Lord Dalhousie announced that with the death of Bahadur Shah Zafar, his successors would have to leave the imperial place, Red Fort. Later, the new Governor General, Lord Canning, he declared that the Mughal emperor's successors would not be allowed to use imperial titles. So imagine people who've been ruling the country for such a long time, and people had so much of respect for those things. The British government showed no respect to them. In fact, they were told to vacate or to move out of the imperial place, the place that was kind of their kingdom, the royal place that they were living in. The British said that you have to move out of this, and Lord Canning said that now the Mughal successors, they will not even be allowed to use the titles. So this really offended the Mughal emperors and their successors. Then no pension for Nana Sahab. So Lord Dalhousie stopped the pension of Nana Sahab, the adopted son of ex-Peshwa Bajirao II, which was initially decided that it would be given. Then the English company or the East India Company, they never respected the treaties. This is something we've studied in the previous chapter also. The English wrote the treaties according to their needs. This created a sense of disbelief and mistrust among the Indian rulers. So if there was a treaty signed after any war and whatever were the terms and conditions, so only those terms and conditions the British agreed to, that was for their benefit. Something which benefited the Indians or the Indian rulers, the British never really followed those points of that treaty. And annexation of Awadh. So Awadh, it was annexed on February 7th in 1856 AD on the grounds of misgovernance. We studied this in the previous chapter also. And Wajid Ali Shah, the Nawab of Awadh, he was sent to exile to Calcutta, and the policy of annexation created panic and a feeling of insecurity among the rulers of other states also, because they felt that today Awadh, such a strong kingdom, is being captured and brought under the control of the East India Company. Tomorrow we might be the next. So these were the political causes that led to that fueled the uprising of 1857. Now let's talk about the economic causes. So we know that how the Indian handicrafts and the textile industry, it declined. So in the previous classes, we studied that how the cheap machine-made goods, they were flooded in the market, and the people stopped buying Indian handicrafts, of course, because they were expensive. So people stopped buying those goods and people started preferring the machine-made goods because they were quite economical. Along with this, we also studied that how, the artisans and all, how even these suffered during the British rule, how they had to, pay taxes or pay a duty, and how the Indian goods were taxed, wherein the British goods were not taxed at all. Then India, it only became the supplier of raw materials to feed the industries in England. So what did the English do? They took away the raw materials such as cotton, sugarcane, oilseeds, etc. And Indians had to buy finished goods. Then, of course, poverty of the peasants. So previous classes, we studied about various systems, the permanent settlement, Ryotwari, Mahalwari system, then how these systems impacted the agriculture sector, the peasants and the cultivators, because they had to pay a huge amount as a tax, and a few of them were also at the mercy of zamindars. Then inhuman treatment of indigo cultivators. So the English planters, they forced the peasants to grow only indigo and no other crop. If they refused, the peasants were tortured. So basically, the farmers were told that you will grow only this crop, and they needed indigo for dyeing clothes. The British needed indigo for dyeing clothes. So they said that only you are going to grow only this crop and no other crop. So obviously, it impacted the local or the native farmers. Then, of course, loss of income. Pandits, Maulvis, soldiers, artisans, and craftsmen, they lost their income when Indian states were annexed. Western education was introduced, and trade and crafts were ruined by the English company and its policy. And Industrial Revolution, I've told you that how the machine-made goods, they flooded the market, and the value or the demand of the Indian handicrafts, it gradually declined. Okay. Sorry. Now we talk about the socio-religious causes. So we know that, how the British tried to reform the education system, and they focused mainly on English education. So within the education system, they also try to, inculcate their religious practices. So Christian missionaries taught Bibles in schools, even in jails, temples, and mosques. The police accompanied the missionaries so the people could not protest. So people were not free to practice the religion that they wanted to. In fact, the religion was binded onto them. Then new laws. There were several laws passed by the company officials. These laws were not welcomed by the Orthodox Indians, like the abolition of sati, abolition of female infanticide, widow remarriage act, etc. The railways were considered as a threat. Indians had to sit side by side, irrespective of caste and religion. So somewhere the the adamant conservative mindset, even those people were disturbed or were not happy with the British policies or the changes that the British brought in the society. Now we talk about the military causes. So first military cause was disparity between British and Indian soldiers. So the army, of course, consisted of British as well as Indian soldiers. Now this is where the Indian soldiers had to face a lot of discrimination. Discrimination in terms of salaries, discrimination in terms of behavior. So So Indians comprise 7/8 of the total British troops in India. The Indian soldiers were looked down upon by the British officers. Their enrollments were very low, that is, the salaries were very low in comparison with those of British soldiers, and the chances of promotion were almost negligible. Indian soldiers were prohibited from their traditional practices like wearing a saffron mask on their forehead, growing a beard, or wearing a turban. Then the General Services Enlistment. So in 1856, the General Services Enlistment Act was passed under Lord Canning. According to this, the Indian sepoys, they were to serve abroad if needed. So they had to cross the sea. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of it or not, but in the Indian culture, it is not considered auspicious, or it is not considered good to cross a sea. So if you remember, or if you've seen Ramayana, if you've read it also, when Lord Rama had to go to Lanka, to Ravan's Lanka, he was God. He could have just, flown to the other end. He would have just crossed it. But he didn't do that. He actually prayed to the ocean, correct? So in our culture, water or the ocean, they're considered as God. So, what do you do? So you do not cross over God like that. Correct? You can't do that. So Lord Ram, what did he do? He prayed to Lord Ocean. He said that I'm sorry, I have to cross you, and in a way I'm walking over you. So please forgive me for that. And only after seeking permission from God, he actually crossed that entire area, that entire ocean. So that is the kind of culture we have, wherein we have respect for natural resources as well. So in the Indian culture, this was there. So the Indians, suppose whenever they had to go abroad, they had to cross a sea, which was against their religious belief. So this too impacted it had a negative, or it inculcated negative feeling in the Indian soldiers who were basically the people who were employed in the military. So these were the military costs. Now, while all these upheavals or all these problems were happening in the political aspect, in the economic aspect, in the military aspect, there was one incident that kind of just added fire to the fuel, and the revolt of 1857 started. What was that immediate cause, and how did this revolt spread to some parts of the country? What was its cause? We are going to study that now. Okay. So, talking about the immediate cause. Now it says a new type of rifle rifle was introduced in the army, which needed a cartridge greased with animal fat. So, when you have to load a gun, there's a rifle. Those small rifles kind of things, or those instruments that you use. You have to fill the rifles with them. Correct. So there was a rumor that these instruments, or these things which have to be placed inside the rifle, they are greased with the they're basically greased with the fat of cow and pig. So in basically India, for the Hindus, cow is sacred, and for the Muslims, the pig is something which they do not consider as good at all. Correct. So basically, now the religious sentiment of the Indians was impacted to a large extent. So when this introduction happened, that the cartridges, they are going to be greased with the fat of cow and pig, the soldiers revolted. They said that we are not going to use this cartridge. Why? Because they had to peel the cartridge with their mouth first. So they said that we will not use the cartridges which has fat of cow and pig. And people's discontent against the British had already gathered to a vast level. The discontentment among the Indian soldiers worked as a small spark to set the fire of the revolt ablaze. Both Hindus and Muslim sepoys, they struck at the pass, that is, they united and they revolted against the British. Soon this turned into a full-fledged revolt of 1857. Now, what was the course of the revolt? How did it start, and where all did it spread? So the Indian sepoys broke out into an open revolt. On 29th March 1857, Mangal Pandey, a young Indian sepoy from Bengal regiment at Barrackpore near Calcutta, he refused to use the greased cartridge. Being insisted to carry out his officer's order for using greased cartridge, he shot down 2 English officers. So he was arrested, tried and executed. The news, it spread like fire and it resulted in general uprising in Meerut, Delhi, Jhansi, Kanpur, Lucknow, and many other places. So this is the portrait of Mangal Pandey. In Meerut, they rose in open revolt on May 10th, 1857. They broke open the prison and released the imprisoned soldiers. Then they marched on to Delhi on May 11th, killing many British officials and burning their bungalows on the way. They cut down the telegraph line on the way to Delhi. Why? Because they had not wanted the communication to go from one place to another. The local infantry joined hands with them. They killed European officers and took over the city. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, was declared as the emperor of India and the leader of the revolt. The British countered brutally. Bahadur Shah Zafar was imprisoned, tried, and exiled to Rangoon. His two sons and grandsons were shot dead and their bodies were displayed on the streets. Thus, the great Mughal dynasty was brought to an end. So basically, even when the soldiers had united and they posed a revolt, which was strong in its way, but still British, because it had gained a lot of understanding about Indians, and of course they had advanced basically weapons. They were able to do what? They were able to revolt back, and unfortunately the British won over in this revolt. Okay. Now what happened next? Now let us understand that the revolt did not work as expected, correct? So what were the reasons for the failure of the revolt? Okay, so it wasn't just that the British were strong enough in terms of their military tools and everything. There were some problems as well. All right. Okay. So what exactly were these causes? Okay. All right. So the first cause was the lack of nationalism and unity. The ideas of nationalism had not really developed well in India till then, and there was no common purpose among the rebels. For example, the sepoys of Bengal wanted to revive the medieval glories of the Mughals. Nana Sahib and Tanta Tope tried to re-establish the Maratha power, and Rani Lakshmibai fought to regain her lost state. So basically, even when people were fighting or were going against the British, they had different purposes. My area should be safe or my positions should be safe. There wasn't a single common aim that the people shared. So the revolt, it could not really assume its true character of a united revolt. Then the emerging middle class, the teachers, traders, intellectuals, public servants, etc., they did not support the revolt or the cause of the rebels. Second, of course, lack of modern weapons and techniques. So both in terms of men, that is trained and organized, and warfare equipment, the Indians suffered a setback, and telegraph and postal services, all these systems, they also added to the British strength and helped the British to speed up their operations. So the lines which probably the Indian soldiers had disconnected, they were put back into system, and the British were able to communicate with each other. And of course, lack of strong leadership, because each ruler was fighting for himself, but not for the entire country as such. And Bahadur Shah Zafar, he was too old and too weak to put up a strong leadership. The rebel leaders were no match to the British generals in quality. Rani Lakshmibai, Tantya Tope, Nana Sahib, they were courageous, but they lacked certain qualities there, which could have actually, basically the manner in which everyone had to be brought under one roof. Now, what were the consequences of the revolt? So the first was that in August 1858, Queen Victoria of Britain passed a proclamation to put an end to the rule of the East India Company. By this proclamation, the Indian colony came directly under the British crown. A cabinet minister was appointed to run the administration, henceforth with the aid of 15 council ministers, 15 council members. The Governor General of India was designated as the Viceroy of India, and Lord Canning, he became the first Viceroy. Then the proclamation also ensured an end to the policy of annexation. The right of adopted princes to become heir to throne was granted, and the proclamation declared that all Indians would be eligible to take up the entrance exam for administrative services. but it depended upon their ability in terms of education. Then unconditional pardon was granted to the rebels, except those who had been responsible for the murder of the Britishers during the revolt. Then it also ensured that no interference would be made in the social and religious belief of the people. And the proclamation also ensured that more money would be spent on the development of agriculture and industry. So somewhere what the British were trying to do, they were only trying to appease the Indians. Appease means to provide a temporary solution to a problem. Okay, because we all probably know what happened next. Now, what was the nature of the revolt? So there's a controversy among the historians about the nature of the revolt. According to English historians, it was only a military revolt. But some Indian scholars like Dadabhai Naroji and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, they called the event of 1857 as mutiny. English statesmen and Karl Marx, people like these, they said this to be a national revolt, and there were others who said that this is the first national war of independence. And then there were some historians who said that it was neither first nor national war of independence. People from all over India did not really participate, so you cannot call it as the national war of independence. In conclusion, it may be said that the revolt was the outburst of grievances of different sections of the society. The way the people united to protest and compelled their leaders like Nana Sahib, Tantya Tope, Rani Lakshmibai, Begum Hasrat Mahal, etc., to fight against the English was remarkable. And we may call it as the war for liberation. So this is the story about revolt of 1857, because people were not happy with the British politically, economically, socially, religiously, in terms of administration. So in any of the spheres, people were not really happy. It's just that this rumor regarding the greased cartridges, it just sparked the revolt and it began. Okay. So I hope all of you like the story of revolt of 1857. If you ever get a chance, please, please, please watch movies based on Mangal Pandey and some other, famous soldiers related to revolt of 1857. Okay, I'm going to see you all in the next class. Till then, bye bye, my dear students.